control.
Depends if they adhere to the Constitution and the...
Well, but considering that Amy Care came from who? Amy Stevens.
Yeah, it depends on whether they
That's
adhere to the
11,200.
Constitution, and we have seen over and over again that ours are not much different than in terms of, Patriot Act and NDAA and the constitutional issues at the state level. I mean, certainly they are better at the state level. I mean, nobody really crossed the line, if you will, on all the evil stuff that was happening during this last legislative session. But the federal level, by and large, I mean, we've had a lot of Republicans vote for a breach of liberties. Yes.
Yeah, on the local scale, I've been involved in some local stuff more in the last few months, and more every day I give thanks that by pure luck I happen to buy property outside the Grand Junction city limits. So for me, the big fight between rural and urban isn't Mesa County versus Denver.
Right.
It's Mesa County versus the city of Grand Junction. And the funny thing, relative to your comment about electing Republicans, it seems like no matter how many Republicans we put on the Grand Junction City Council, the town is still Agenda 21-ville, and I don't see anything happening to change that.
Have you ever run for public office? Do you understand what goes on at the city council?
Well, that's a funny thing. I went to the city council, I went to a couple of things like the city council meetings and the planning commission meeting, and they seemed like they were kind of normal operations. But I went to a couple of these city council workshops where special interests come in, make their spiel with no opposition from anyone, because you have to be the official speaker, even be on the agenda. All you can do is sit in the audience and scowl. And they kind of come in, hypnotize the city council into giving them money and things like that. And even people on the committee, on the city council, who are supposedly fiscal conservatives will say, well, I guess I'm a fiscal conservative, but this sounds like a really good deal, so I'm going to have to go along with it. And these are Republicans and supposedly fiscal conservatives. Electing them to the city council doesn't seem to make any difference.
Well, point taken. I think it comes back to the comment over here, which is really, I mean, people really understand and respect the Constitution, and it's at all levels. It's at the city level, county level,
I don't think
Title
it's an
32
issue
district.
of respecting the Constitution, as good of an idea as that is. People who run for office do so because they have egos a lot larger than anybody in this room, or at least weighs any of us sitting here. Okay? They do that because they
run
want...
for office, just don't sit and talk about it.
Well, I mean, I think there are people that run for office that have big egos, and there are people that run for office that have principles.
Once they get elected, then they find out that they're one of N people. City council, it's 5. It's 5-card poker. Any 5-card or 7-card, whatever, doesn't matter. You're one of those few people. Everything you do from that point on is either coalition formation with the people you're with, or you're responding to the staff. The reason that all of this is going south on us is the staff. We have to. I mean, all the Constitution in the world is great, as long as we're at the same time neutering the government and taking the staff down. Because that's why your guys, that's why your agendas work the way they are in workshops. I've been there.
Yeah. I understood.
That's absolutely true, because the city staff just runs roughshod over the city council.
Well, and that's the problem in all areas, is the bureaucrats are running the elected officials, and instead of elected officials being over and managing the bureaucrats. I mean,
So how do you fix that?
Well, you have to have elected officials that understand that their role is to run. Yeah.
Wouldn't it help just a little bit, perhaps, if people better understood the definition of a conservative, and that's not fiscal conservative. Right. As Ted Cruz says, conservatism is a philosophy. It isn't being a fiscal conservative. It is, there are 3 things. And if you aren't asking these questions of your political people that are running for office, but you need to be. Are you a constitutionalist? are you a person who believes in truth? And are you a person who believes in the rule of law that flows from the Constitution of the United States? If they can't tell you, if they can't define what a conservative is, you've got a problem, and you've got someone whose ego is going to get messed up and who's going to be on a power trip and so on. People who truly believe in a conservative philosophy don't go down that path. I'm sorry, I don't believe they do.
Yeah, I think there is there's a distinction to conservative and a constitutionalist. There's a huge difference. Because you can be conservative in principles, but yet run roughshod over individual liberties and constitutional provisions.
Here, here.
So the question. So we all understand the urban versus rural divide. I mean, it's that way throughout the state, and it really is a kind of a Denver-Boulder corridor versus the rest of the state. I mean, there are other large urban populations, but it's really in terms of the Denver-Boulder corridor has 40% of the population of the state just within it. If you aggregate the adjacent cities, not all those cities, not all those people are unconstitutionalists, if you will, or have lacking constitutional values. But by and large, that's the rub, is the urban versus rural divide. So the question is for the people in the rural communities: is that ever going to change? Is it ever going to get you better? And the answer to that is no. And why is that? Because the population, as it grows in the state, goes to the urban centers, right?
There
For
was
the
an
most part.
unfortunate Supreme Court decision in the 70s. About 10 or 15 years ago, we discussed this topic at a fair length over beer at one of the NRA annual meetings. One of the attorneys, very bright
Hey,
guy,
Gene, how long is this gonna take?
a minute.
Quickly.
There was a Supreme Court decision that decided that everything had to be done on population basis. 76, 78 decision. Until we do anything with that, we're not going to fix this problem.
Talking about the 1964 decision I've got
Okay.
it here. Something
And
versus
I'll go with
Sims.
64.
Yeah. One man, one vote concept. Yep.
We have to do something with that. And it's not Colorado's
Absolutely.
problem. It's the whole Western world's got the same problem.
Right. Yeah, and I'll get to that in a second, because I'm going to go over these five core principles that we've developed in the back of this, and one of those is trying to address that specific issue. So, Constitution. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution or prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states or to the people. Okay, what is that?
10th Amendment.
10th Amendment, okay. So that's what we need, is a state government that understands the role of a state government, right? What we have right now is really no states that understand the role of a state government. There isn't a model in place right now in the country that we believe that has the model of the 51st state. What we're attempting to do is reinstitute a state that has as its framework what is intended for government, then federal government. State government has more power, has the ability to push back on the power of the federal government. So avoiding federal entanglement, as we call it, a more powerful local government as it relates to government, but yet the people are empowered over the local government. So, as much as you are frustrated with city council or school board or county commissioners, the reality is, in your community, you have the most impact on them. Do you really have that much impact on your state legislature or your state senator or your U.S. congressional rep or your U.S. senator? The reality is, if you send something to your your congressional delegation, you're like one of a bazillion people that are chain emailing something to them, and they don't respond to that. Your best way of influencing the way that things are happening with your lives is at the local level, as long as the power is vested in local power. If local governments, like our county council, doesn't have the authority to nullify state gun control legislation because it's not appropriate, doesn't have that, then affecting gun control legislation at the local level, it doesn't happen. You got to go to the state level. So getting back to, I'll get to that in a second here. So let me ask you this. Did those that helped form the state of Colorado indefinitely abdicate certain rights to the federal government?
No.
You can argue that, did the federal government take that control, or did the state governments cede that control?
We let them take it.
We let them take that. And who's we?
We the people.
We the people, exactly. But that really stems from the fact that the state government didn't understand its role, and we the people couldn't force the state government to do something it was unwilling to do. And in some cases, in this last legislative session, the state government didn't listen to people, even though people were screaming at the top of their lungs. So all the things, so let's talk about National Defense Authorization Act, or the NSA scandal, or Obamacare, just as a few things. The formation of the Federal Reserve, which happened before our lifetimes. Did we indefinitely grant those rights to the federal government? Did we? No, we didn't. So the power is not delegated to the United States or reserved to the states or to the people. The reality is, if you understand the history and the cycle of man, I was at one point in my life, I was a poli-sci major in college, and then I'm actually an accountant by trade, so I was going to go to law school, so I was a poli-sci and an accounting double major. And the only thing I remember out of my brief history of poli-sci was this book I read called The Rise and Fall of Great Nations. And Paul Jackson, I think, or something was the name, and I looked at it, and it chronicles the cycle of nations over time. Extensive military expansion leading to debt, leading to collapse of the empire. I mean, it's the cycle of man. It's inherent really within the cycle of individual man. Man takes advantage, just we talked about the ego. Once they get in power, the ego drives them. So it's kind of if you want to call it, from my perspective, religious, it's the sinful nature of man. It's the selfish nature of man. That's perpetuated and been shown throughout civilization. So our framers, they understood that was going to happen over time, or they understood the possibility for that to happen. So what did they do? Instead of forcing us to fight the Revolutionary War again, what did they give us instead of that?
Constitution.
Constitution, but specifically what in the Constitution?
10th Amendment.
Well, the 10th Amendment, but yeah, that has failed, hasn't it? So what is the next thing beyond that?
I don't think it has. I think it fails because the people don't understand it and don't do what they are responsible for doing.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I think that the elections that were just held in El Paso and Pueblo, El Paso County and
Right.
Colorado Springs, Pueblo, are evidence of that. I'm looking for a good lawyer who will file a violation of oath of office charge against Hickenlooper for signing that legislation.
Right.
But if citizens take, the answer to the question is yes, but the fact is, a big part of the blame is our own because we don't do what we're responsible as citizens for doing.
Yeah, I would agree. I was trying to get to the next thing, which is you're supposed to help me draw my own conclusion.
Secession.
So what's in the yeah. So, and I don't like to use the word secession because it's misconstrued, misunderstood. Because when most people hear secession, they think of Texas, which is seceding from the Union, which that's a whole other conversation whether that should be allowed or not. But it's technically not allowed, I guess you could say it. But
The Declaration of Independence gives all bodies of politic in any group or any territorial area the right to, at any time, break its ties if those ties become damaging to the body politic.
That's right.
And one of the ways that we're doing that is through Article 4, Section 3 specifically, which is the process that you use to create a new state. So I'm not going to argue secession
No,
from the Union.
I think
We are at a
people
point
fight
right
for
now where what we call is irreconcilable differences beyond the point of no return. Even if we got control for a period of time in this state of the legislature, we being, if you think your Republicans are the answer to the solution, if a party got control, it's temporary because the fact of the matter is the urban populations will continue to grow, and we all know what the result of that is. So that's kind of the conclusion. Secession, if you will, which is seceding from the state, not seceding from the union, creating of a new state from the existing boundaries of a current state, is not revolutionary. It's what we call restorationary. It is what the framers envisioned we had to do at a certain point in time, we would have to do. We're trying to restore our government or restore our society to what the framers of the Constitution originally envisioned.
And to its legal blueprint.
And to
its
its legal blueprint.
Its legal boundaries.
Right. So it's not that we want to create a red state, because a red state is not the right answer. A constitutionally based state that respects individual liberties, and I'll go through those five things again. That's what we're attempting to do. So how long did it take, for the history buffs, how long did it take for Colorado to become a state? When did it first start thinking about it? When did it become a state? What was the answer?
Something like 50 years.
Well, not quite. I'm looking for a little more tighter. When it really started to become, from territory to state,
I think it would have been the 10 years or so
it
after
was
the
about
Civil War.
16 years, I think, is what I was looking for. 3 attempts in Congress, right?
1858 or?
Yeah, so around 1860, finalized in 1876. So the solution, we believe, is not a restoration of the current state. Even we got it back, got control back as conservatives, if you want to call it that. The question is, will those conservatives roll back all the damage that has been done? Roll back the damage of SB 252, roll back the constitutional mandate for 10% alternative energy, roll back the gun control legislation, roll back the voter fraud bill. I mean, just looking at things in the last year, let alone...
Roll back extension of police powers to all federal agencies.
Exactly. I mean, that's just the state stuff we're talking about, let alone the state then taking on the battle when it has to. Nullification, in essence. So with that being some background, I guess if you want to turn to the backside of this, this is something that we've been developing for a while. What is the vision for the 51st state? Back to a framework for a constitutional government. Number one, first and foremost, going back to the Declaration, sir, primary goal of government is to protect individuals' right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right? That is the essence of the Declaration. Government should be protecting that, not stealing it. In order to do that, we must avoid federal entanglement where possible. Now, the reality is that's a very complicated situation because they steal so much of our money, in essence. There's a right role for government, for the federal government. If you want to go back to a constitutional government, we have a guy that's studying this right now. He hasn't shared all of his vision with us, but he's trying to say what portion of the federal government is constitutional versus extra-constitutional, or you could call it unconstitutional. He's saying it's somewhere like 30% of the federal budget really could be constituted as constitutional. I'm guessing that that is probably inflated because the military budget is so significant right now. So I don't know where he gets that. So I'll talk about a practical example of avoiding federal entanglement when I get through these other points. Local government is most accountable. It's people most likely to be held accountable for taking away individual liberties. So should have the most power, if you want to call that in the context of government, or most authority. State governments should be limited in their powers and delegate authority to local governments as much as possible. Now, there is a role at times for state government. I'm not saying there should be a state government. And then the fifth one, which is critical back to the rural versus urban, what do you call it, friction, if you will, is the use of the Phillips County proposal, or that the U.S. congressional legislative model at the state level. Now, the reality is, if we formed a new state government, there's some political aspects to that. Could we put that in our initial constitution? Maybe, maybe not. If we follow the process, we have to get to Congress. Congress has to approve the new state, which includes that constitution. Would they approve a constitution that they would see that violated specifically a U.S. Supreme Court case? I don't know. So there's a little bit of politics in that. But we have to have a model like that. So maybe it's not the state is represented, one senator, elected one senator per county, but a senator is appointed by a county commissioner, your pre-17th Amendment vision, a version of the U.S. Senate as an idea. That would also solve the rural versus urban kind of a natural friction that happens over time. It would also slow down legislation, which is, I think, if you had a really good, solid constitution, slowing down legislation is not a bad thing at all. So those are kind of the 5 core principles. You can see this is, the top current model government, very top-heavy federal government, a very powerful state government. Some vested authority local governments, and you see that little box at the line below where you can barely even read. It says "We the People," because our liberties are being crushed. We the people should be in charge, be giving authority to government. There's at the local level more authority, less authority at the state level, and then constitutional authority or constitutionally based authority at the federal level. So that's the gist of what we're attempting to do. The next phase of this process, so if you guys have heard about the 11 counties that have referred this to the ballot, those elections will be next month. We're almost 8 weeks away, again in November. So those are what we call non-binding the referendums in the counties are in essence an official poll for those counties. They don't then, if those are approved, those counties don't become the new state. New state happens through state